Exodus chapter 2 is a great place to turn. Our study this afternoon begins with Miriam. And then we'll look at Mordecai. I almost skipped Miriam, not intentionally. I guess, well, I may have done it intentionally, but then I had second thoughts later and thought we would include her here. Next week, Lord willing, we'll begin Moses, and that will probably take a few weeks. I've allotted 3 weeks for that, but we'll see how that goes. But Miriam is his sister. So she was the older sister, it seems. If she was the sister of Exodus chapter 2, which makes sense to me, that would make Miriam the older sister of Aaron and Moses, older than Aaron and Moses, a few years older. She was a prophetess, and she led an effort to basically, it seems, supplant Moses, and for selfish reasons. We'll see that more on that whenever we get there in Numbers chapter 12, and was ultimately punished by God for it. And that kind of ended up being her legacy. And that's why she's called here the woman whose jealousy brought judgment. So Exodus 2, we'll look at 3. The handout that we're using here, I heavily abbreviated this one. No disrespect to Miriam, but I'm going to try to keep it within 2 pages, front and back, from now on, which is not going to be easy, but it worked out for Miriam. It points out 5 different things of her. I think probably 3 of them will suffice. I would pretty much consider it 3, even though there's 5 listed. Starting in Exodus 2, when she was a little girl. And we won't spend too much time on this. But first of all, let me just say we're assuming that this girl was Miriam. It doesn't say it was Miriam, so that makes it technically an assumption. But she's the only sister that we read of Moses and Aaron having, and so it makes perfect sense. But if you remember, whenever Moses was born, the context from Exodus chapter 1 was that they were supposed to kill all the Hebrew male babies. And Pharaoh said, or commanded that, to try to keep the Hebrews under control. But Moses was born, and his mother and father decided to not do that. And she made a little manger thingy basket out of, she made it waterproof or whatever, water resistant, and put little baby Moses in there in the reeds so that he would be discovered by the Pharaoh's daughter. And along with putting the little baby in there, she also sent her older daughter, her daughter that was older, to go and keep an eye on it and see how things went. And it was this girl that we're assuming was Miriam who went out and spoke to Pharaoh's daughter whenever she found the baby and said, "Hey, do you want me to find a woman, a servant woman, to take care of this child?" And she said, "Yes, go." And that girl went and got her mom, which was also the baby's mom. So we're assuming that was Miriam. And that's the first time we see Miriam, if that was her. But the first time we read about Miriam is in Exodus chapter 15, by name, that is, when she's mentioned by name. And in Exodus chapter 15, verse 20, it says, this is right after the crossing of the Red Sea, and we read the song of Moses in Exodus 15. And then verse 20 says, "Then Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron," interestingly, she's called the sister of Aaron, not the sister of Moses and Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to Jehovah, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea." And that's Miriam. That's all there is about her in that spot. Moses' song is a little bit longer, but what we read is that Miriam also was taking a part in this and started leading the women in this sort of song of praise. But what's, I think, the most interesting thing about this, and this will definitely play into what happened in Numbers 12, is Miriam is explicitly called a prophetess. So we don't know exactly to what extent she was a prophetess, what that meant exactly, as far as, compared to a prophet. Is it exactly the same? Were there limitations, or how did that work? We don't know. But what we do know is that Moses, who wrote Exodus, said that his sister Miriam was a prophetess. So just file that away for a second. We don't read about Miriam again until Numbers chapter 12. And in Numbers chapter 12, by the time we get to Numbers 12, Moses had gone through quite a bit with the people, and not a whole lot of good things happening. And if you remember, Moses was the undisputed leader. Aaron, back in Egypt, was his spokesperson, so he was going to say to Pharaoh what God told to Moses. Moses would tell Aaron, and Aaron would tell Pharaoh, because Moses made those excuses about how I'm not a good speaker and so on and so forth. But we also learn why God chose Moses instead of Aaron, within this time, because Aaron was apparently not as strong as his brother Moses. And we see that again. We saw it in Exodus 32 when the people said, we don't know where Moses is gone. And Aaron said, give me all your gold and stuff. And then they made that calf. Now we're going to see another pattern, but at this time it's Miriam. So here's what we read in Numbers chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has Jehovah indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And Jehovah heard it. And this is the verse where it says, now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And that's about to be proven further in that chapter. Miriam, it seems, was the leader in this little coup effort. And we conclude that because she got a greater punishment. So here's what's interesting to me about this whole situation. Moses tells us in the writing here what their problem was, or what their problem. I don't know how to take it other than here's what their problem was. Moses married a Cushite, and Miriam and Aaron, I guess, but it seems especially Miriam didn't like that very much. So what's interesting is whenever they make their move, they didn't say a word about a Cushite woman. Not a single word. They could have, but it seems they had nothing that wasn't mentioned. Now, they spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he married, but then when they spoke up, didn't say a word about the Cushite woman he married. They said, what is God only speaks to him? Hasn't he spoken through us? And here's where I say, the fact that she was a prophetess does connect to this, because being a prophetess, that means that her line of argument wasn't totally untrue, because it seems that at the very least, the only thing that could make her a prophetess is if Jehovah did speak through her. So we can only assume that there had been times over the years that God had spoken through Miriam, because she was a prophetess. But what she was doing here was she was jealous. There's really no other way to describe it, I guess. It was the Cushite woman that seems to maybe have thrown her over the edge and made this come out. But she was jealous of Moses. Aaron may have even been jealous of Moses a little bit. So he joined in and basically tried to undermine Moses' authority. But God heard it, and he was not happy at all. And so he calls Aaron and Miriam to his office, if you will. Suddenly Jehovah said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, "Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting." And the three of them came out. And Jehovah came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, he rebukes them harshly. But Miriam, most of all. Because what happened to her? She suddenly was leprous, like snow, white, boils. Not fun. Now, why just Miriam? Well, the only conclusion is Miriam was the leader. She dragged Aaron into this, and that's totally consistent with Aaron's character because he let the people drag him into the golden calf too, if you remember. Now, he's let Miriam, big sister Miriam, drag him into this. And she was punished for this.
But remember, he didn't actually make that golden calf. It just came out.
Yeah, it just happened somehow. We put the gold in there and poof, it was the craziest thing. But yeah, Miriam, this is an unfortunate blemish spot on her record. Sadly for her, it's pretty much the only thing on her record, except for the song, the leading the women in the songs, the fact that she was a prophetess, and then the thing at the if that was her when Moses had just been born, which would have made Aaron would have been 3 years old at that time, by the way. Aaron cried out to Moses on Miriam's behalf, and Moses cried out to God on Miriam's behalf, and she was healed. But she was still shut outside the camp for 7 days. And, the handout, the author here puts in there sort of as a fourth thing that we see her as a repentant leper outside the camp. I'm not so sure. I think maybe he's just being generous, but we don't really see any record of Miriam apologizing or anything. It's Aaron who cries out, and then Moses cries out on her behalf. But she's just, it says the people did not set out on the march until Miriam was brought in again. So they had to stay there for a week while Miriam was outside the camp. And she was healed because Moses interceded on her behalf. And we don't read about her again until her death, which is recorded in Numbers chapter 20 and verse 1. And that's pretty much it for Miriam, the big sister of Moses and Aaron.
So do you think Moses had two wives at one time, or do you think that the Midianite woman had died?
I'm not sure. It really is one of those toss-ups. Could literally be either one. It's not mentioned, so yeah, hard to say. But for whatever reason, Miriam didn't like her because she was a Cushite, I guess. I've always found it fascinating that it explicitly says she spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman, and then she speaks up, has nothing to do at all with the Cushite woman. And I think that's true to life sometimes. We may beat around the bush and cause a fuss over something that's not really the thing we have a problem with. Or else, what she really had a problem with all along was jealousy for her brother having all the authority, and she just used this as sort of a thing to propel this complaint. Either way, it's a little deceitful in some way. But here's some lessons I would say we could learn from Miriam in this, short time. If my primary motivation for complaint is selfish, I should check myself and not my rival. You see, Moses had not done anything. I mean, all Moses was doing, he wasn't a perfect man, but as far as Miriam's complaint was concerned, he hadn't done anything wrong. He was just, God called him. He did not call Aaron. He called Moses. And Moses was the authority. And so Aaron and Miriam, whatever leadership they had, was under the leadership of their little brother Moses. And it seems that Miriam, and maybe Aaron to an extent, started to get weary of that. And so Miriam launched this and Aaron followed suit. But it was purely selfish, no matter what. Both of those things. The Cushite woman he married may have been selfish, but the complaint that she made, the fuss that she stirred up, was purely selfish. And you can see it in the wording. What, has Jehovah indeed spoken only through Moses? Hasn't He spoken through us too? So why is He so special? Probably should have thought that through before and realized, you know what? My motivation, this is not the best move here. I need to settle down and know my place.
It's kind of a sibling thing, though, I think, rivalry and all of that, and the kid feel label over it, in the very beginning there, so, and, I found it in my own childhood, you just get jealous over things.
Yeah.
Your siblings more than a friend or something.
Mm-hmm. Sibling rivalry. And, Miriam, assuming it was Miriam in Exodus 2, is like, I remember when I was watching you as a little baby, screaming, squalling baby in that river, and the only reason you're alive is because of me. I changed your poopy diapers, and now I got to listen to you? Something like that. Surely that came up at some point in their life together. Yeah, Joe?
Okay. God specifically says, you should have figured this out because I talked with Moses face to face.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys, I don't know how you talked to Miriam and Aaron. Dreams,
Yeah.
and I could see, it's just a, what do you call it, tradition now, but in the Jewish synagogue, men sit on one side, women sit on the other side, and there's a partition down the middle. And so it would make sense that Miriam may have taught only the women. But I'm just wondering how God spoke to her to be a prophetess. Scripture.
Yeah, based on what he said, his reasoning here would certainly lend itself to assume, like he said, in a vision or in a dream. But his point is, I don't do it like that with Moses. I speak with him. I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, not in riddles, and so on. So his rhetorical question is pretty powerful. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Like why you should, the implication is, you should have been afraid to speak out against Moses because I've chosen him to be what he is. And he didn't choose it. In fact, he did everything he could to avoid it, but God wasn't having it. So he says, he's showing them, or trying to get it into their heads, Moses is special. He's a prophet, but in a different way than you, the prophetess Miriam, and even Aaron. Aaron, after all, God calls him Moses' prophet. So Aaron was Moses' prophet. Moses was God's prophet. And he spoke with him in a different way. So again, he's building up that argument that you should have been afraid. And if we should also be afraid to speak out against people who are just doing what God wants. If they're doing what God wants, and I have a problem with that, then I'm the one with the problem. Yeah.
If your focus is the Lord and His people, you're right. But as Debbie was saying, Aaron and Miriam had to watch Moses live in Pharaoh's house and given all the amenities of wealth. see that becoming jealous of that, and irrespective of not paying attention to what God wanted.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They cared more for the worldly things.
So, yeah, that's just another issue then, that they weren't thinking clearly, and I think God kind of set them straight, and you would think maybe now they are, snapped them out of it. You would think, anyway. Number 2, stirring up a fuss over something that's not even the real issue is as childish as it is pointless. So it's literally pointless to stir up some kind of fuss over something that's not even the problem that you have. What are you accomplishing? What's the point? Again, I'm referring to Cushite woman, but then what? God's only spoken to Moses. He's spoken to us too, so why is he so special? What do those two things have to do with each other than trying to tear Moses down? So it's pointless, but it's a very childish thing to do. If you have a problem with somebody, try to work it out like adults. And first of all, check yourself, because then you may not even have to go to them, because you may actually, if we're honest and sincere, realize, wait, the only problem here is me, so I need to fix me, and this is over now, because I've already realized, after thinking about it, that I'm the problem. And then God's no respecter of persons. Acts 10:34, Romans 2:11, Galatians 2:6. Here's another example of how that works. Miriam was a prophetess. She was also the big sister of Moses. Didn't make a bit of difference. She was in the wrong, and God punished her. And by the way, spoiler alert, he would do the same thing to Moses. When Moses stepped out of line, God punished Moses without partiality. Wrong is wrong, and it doesn't matter who a person is. I would like to think, like the writer of this book here, that Miriam did repent and get it together before her life ended. But can't know for certain.
In both cases, it was temporary. When he corrected Miriam,
Yeah.
7 days. And then Moses, yes, he didn't get to go to the promised land, he got to go to the real one in heaven. So both of those were disciplines that God gave here. And if you get discipline, this is where you want it, not on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Can't even compare. Much better to receive it here. Okay, Mordecai. Mordecai is a Benjaminite from the post-captivity era who remained in foreign soil and adopted and raised a young Jewish girl named Esther, who was his cousin, because she is said to be his uncle's daughter. By my calculation, that makes her a cousin. Your uncle's daughter is your cousin, right? But he adopted her as his own, pretty much, raised her as a father, as his own daughter, and ultimately helped her after she became queen, of course, to save the Jewish people from extinction, annihilation by their enemies. Mordecai's an interesting character. He's called the man who was a virtuous patriot. His name is interesting because you can see by the various possible meanings, kind of three very different possibilities. Dedicated to Mars, which just makes it an idolatrous name, basically. A little man, or bitter bruising. Can't tell you which one is more likely.
So Mordecai is not his Jewish given name.
Apparently not. If that first one was the meaning, the correct meaning, then certainly no self-respecting Jew would name their child dedicated to Mars. So, yeah. It is a name, I mean, a lot of the names are funny sounding to us, but it does maybe sound a little different than a lot of Old Testament names, so there might be something to that. But Mordecai, We don't have much record of him raising Esther other than the fact that it's just said to have happened. He raised her. Verse 7, chapter 2, verse 7 is where it says she's the daughter of his uncle because she didn't have any parents. Her parents had died, or it seems, because everybody has parents. So, I mean, her parents must have passed away at some point when she was very little. But he obviously, a lot of what we know about his character is basically deduced from the kind of woman Esther was, and maybe that's giving him too much credit, but I think it's only fair that he surely had something to do with the kind of woman Esther grew to be, young lady Esther grew to be, and we see his interactions with her. He was wise. He was a very wise man, and he helped her and looked after her, protected her. But then he discovers a plot against the king, Xerxes. He sat at the king's gate, heard two eunuchs who were plotting stupidly in the open for some reason to assassinate the king. Mordecai finds out about it. He tells Esther, who's now the queen, and then she tells the king in Mordecai's name. So they investigated it, found it to be true, and then those two men were executed. And they recorded that in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. That is, major to be continued because that comes back up later. But really the whole book of Esther is, Esther, Mordecai, Haman, the enemy, and the king are kind of the four main players here. And Mordecai was a man of some influence, it seems. Sitting at the king's gate seems to have been some sort of, if not official thing, at least something that he seems to have been known in the community, if you will. And he was a prudent man. He kind of told Esther, "Don't tell anybody." He didn't kind of. He told her directly, "Don't tell anybody that you're a Jew. Don't tell anybody about who you are." We might cut Mordecai slack where we shouldn't, to be honest. We don't know the full story behind why his part in this story sort of starts off with the man Haman coming through, and Mordecai refused to bow to him. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we have sort of inserted the explanation that Mordecai wouldn't bow down or pay homage to him because he only bowed down to God. Now, there's nowhere that I can think of in the text that explicitly says or makes that excuse for Mordecai that he wouldn't do it because he viewed that to be some sort of idolatry. Because in theory, it wouldn't necessarily be idolatry to bow or pay homage to a leader. I don't think anybody would confuse that with worship necessarily. You bow down, and that's just the thing that people did apparently. But he wouldn't do it, and so maybe his motives were pure. Maybe he just didn't want to do it. But one thing we do know, Haman didn't like it one bit, and that's sort of what kicked off this whole thing. He finds out Mordecai's a Jew. He's going to kill all the Jews. We see how great of a guy he was. So ultimately, Mordecai, we remember that fateful night, for lack of a better word. The king couldn't sleep, so they brought in the book of the Chronicles, and they're going to read it, and surely that would help him sleep. But he found out about Mordecai saving his life. And then, how do we honor him? Haman came up with this big thing because he thought he was talking about himself, narcissist. And he said, okay, go do that for Mordecai the Jew. So he leads him through on the king's horse and all this, and so on and so forth. But finally, the plot is revealed, and Haman is executed on the very thing that he was going to kill Mordecai. And Mordecai grows in power because of Esther, pretty much. He gets Haman's place. And then finally, the king says you can change the law or write a law. They can't change the law, but they can write a new law to help them. And Mordecai, we read the way this whole thing ends is they successfully defend their people. They're not annihilated, thanks to Esther and Mordecai. And the Mordecai grew. Let me find the verse here. He grew and he kept growing in power. It says, no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all the peoples. And then it says, all the officials of the provinces, this is chapter 9, verse 3, and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. And then it kind of ends with, in verse 3, chapter 10, verse 3. Chapter 10 is only 3 verses. For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus or Xerxes, for he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. So there's sort of a legacy unto itself for Mordecai. He sought the welfare of his people and was very popular for that. Yeah.
Weren't the Jews subservient at this point? And so therefore they were slaves or second-class citizens to the people of the community, of the world, so to speak. And so I could see, you're my slave, you're going to do what I told you, which is why Haman thought he could do that. And I mean, it was pretty gutsy of Mordecai not to do it.
Yeah, it was gutsy, for sure.
And so for him not to do it, you have to get the impression that he thought God was on his side. It wasn't just out of pride.
Well, it could have been.
You're just another human, and that's it.
Yeah. It really rests on what is involved in bowing down and paying homage. That sort of is key to understanding. And we still wouldn't know what his motive was because we're not told. But it could have been, whether Mordecai was right or wrong for not bowing down is sort of irrelevant. It just sort of gets lost. It's just these things are recorded because it's what happened. So the writer of Esther, which may have been Mordecai, we're not told that either, he doesn't make any effort to defend what Mordecai did. It simply records, this is what he did. So, and this is this were the repercussions, and this is how it all played out. So, if anything is going to, my favorite verse of the whole book of Esther is Esther 4:14, because this is Mordecai's speech to Esther, and it's such a powerful providence passage, because he says, if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So that is Mordecai. And if you remember, Esther is the only book in the Bible where God's not mentioned. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That is as close as the book gets to bringing God into the picture explicitly. Who knows? Something bigger might be going on here, is basically what he's saying. So this all might be happening for a reason. So if you don't do anything, God's going to save the Jews somehow. But you're going to be killed. I'm going to be killed. And all the people we know are going to be killed. God might have put you here for just this moment. So basically he's saying, do something. And so the reason Esther would not, she doesn't seem to have been inclined to do this on her own. Mordecai urged her to do this and risk her at the risk of her life, and he convinces her. So he obviously was a good father figure to her. He was a father to her. It seems he was the only father she ever knew. Her cousin Mordecai, and so she listened to him. She submitted to him, listened, and I think he probably deserves quite a bit of credit for shaping who this young woman became. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the real word was, but if you look up in the dictionary what homage, it's like a special allegiance to a lord,
Mm-hmm.
which any child of God, either in the Old Testament or New, you could not bow down and give homage to anything other than God. That
You sure?
is not, it's in the Ten Commandments.
What about be subject to your leaders?
Well, but you don't worship them.
No, not worship. No, but it doesn't say worship. It just says bow down and pay homage.
And that's what I'm saying. The definition of homage is that you're giving a special lordship to that person.
Yeah, but they might have a special lordship.
Well, it's not happening.
Does the President of the United States have a special lordship? You ever said the Pledge of
I
Allegiance?
think he's a wonderful man. I think that, but he is not my God.
Did you say the pledge as a child of allegiance?
Before I was a Christian, I'm sure.
Have you said it after?
I don't know.
Well, have you repented of it?
Very long time.
Have you repented of it?
Well, when I went forward, I repented of everything.
Okay, including saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
Anything that was not approved by God. But you know, an
Well, I'm not of the.
allegiance is not bowing down.
It's paying homage. I pledge allegiance to the flag. I only pledge allegiance to God. Right? Is that what?
I only bow down to him.
Okay, but isn't it similar? Paying homage, you're acknowledging the authority. It doesn't have to be divine authority to pay homage to.
For my dad, when he was alive,
Okay.
basically because it was his way or the highway. So you either do what he says or, but I honored him as my dad. But at no point would I put him above my Lord God. Because, the scriptures clearly says it. Clearly says.
Yeah.
You have to put everybody behind your allegiance to God. And that includes the government. But I know that it's faulty. I know that it's man-made. And I know that it's temporary here on earth, where God and his worship is not.
Yeah. So this is why I say, since the motive of Mordecai isn't revealed, if there was a verse that explained the reason he didn't do this is because it would have been sinful and idolatrous because it's making a man into God, then we could say, okay, well, the reason he didn't want to do it, is this. But since the question that we're unable to answer is, does what these people were doing for Haman, did it amount to a renouncing of God? Is it putting somebody above God? And as long as that is unclear, then there's really nothing we could say. But as far as the text is concerned, it doesn't necessarily say that this would have been assigning some sort of divinity to Haman. It could have just been paying homage as an authoritative figure that he was.
Is that what happened to Daniel?
Daniel was different because that was an image that was built to, or not Daniel, but his Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, that was a golden image that did seem to be idolatrous, and the whole thing was an idolatrous type behavior, bowing down to this golden image of that was thoroughly rooted in idolatry. But in this case, it was just, I guess, whenever he walked through or whatever, people would bow down and pay homage to him. So, if it was in a spiritual, religious, worshipful sense, then Mordecai was right to not do it. If it was less than that and was just a normal paying respect to your leaders, then it may have been that Mordecai just didn't want to do it because he didn't like him. And we sympathize with Mordecai because Haman was just a total. So many words could describe him, and some of them we shouldn't say probably, but he was a rascal. He was a scoundrel. He was a pathetic piece of work, and he got what was coming to him. And that's because of Mordecai, partially, or a lot of it was. All right, lessons from Mordecai. Here's one, very ironically for today, not planned. Speaking of providence, never underestimate the impact of a godly father figure in a young person's life. While we don't really see much of Mordecai's spiritual life in Esther, which may sound shocking to you because I think we've inserted that into it, and I think by assumption we can it's warranted and makes sense to assume that he was. The text doesn't really tell us. Doesn't even describe him as like some people are described in their godly lives or whatever. But just the kind of woman Esther grew to be, the way she listened to him and submitted to him, and the advice that he gave, he was clearly a very powerful figure in her life. The story of Esther could have been totally different if Mordecai hadn't been the one who adopted her and raised her. Number 2, the right thing to do is always the right thing to do, period. And what I mean, I'm referring here to Mordecai discovering the plot to kill King Xerxes. Xerxes, not a good guy at all. I mean, talk about a piece of work. This guy was a psycho. Some men, hearing 2 eunuchs talking about an assassination plot, may have just closed their little ears and whistled and, turned the other way and just be like, hey, I'll be okay if he's dead. In fact, it'll be better. Everybody will be better off. It'll be better for Esther if this guy's killed. But guess what? 2 eunuchs plotting to kill and assassinate the king is wrong. It's wrong to do that. And so Mordecai did the right thing. He called the police, if you will. He turned them in because that's the right thing to do. So even though that man was bad and he was evil and he was so many other things, it was the right thing to do. And so Mordecai did it. The right thing to do is always the right thing to do. Number 3, we cannot know when or how God's providence will play out, but we can be used in it. And that's Esther 4:14. If you keep silent, God's going to do it somehow. But you can be a part of God's providence. You can let God use you in the saving of our people. So, still holds true today. We cannot know. It's not just that we don't know. We absolutely cannot know when God's providence is at play, is at work, or how it's going to be at work. But we can allow ourselves to be instruments that God uses. Just think about, somebody being converted. A person may or may not be converted. God may or may not work providentially for somebody to be converted, to find the truth, like a sincere soul who's seeking the truth can find the truth and be converted. But you, even though you have no clue when God might be doing that, you can be the one that God uses to get them the truth. You can be the one that God... So you can, with every soul that you come across, can make the same reasoning that Mordecai does. If I keep silent at this time, the person will hear the truth from somebody. Of course, that's an assumption because that may not be true. But we can still reason like that. However, I might be in this place for just this time to present the truth to that person. So it turns out I can be used by God in His providence, even though I have no way otherwise to know if or when God will be doing something providential in any aspect of life. So be an instrument, in other words. Do like Mordecai told her, why don't you do something? God's going to get somebody to do something, but why don't you let God use you to do something? And number 4, God has ways of turning things around for those who are His. So Mordecai, we don't get the impression he was in a real bad way early in like we already said, he was at the king's gate and stuff, but look at, as this played out, Mordecai just keeps rising and rising. He gets Haman's, first of all, he doesn't get hanged on the gallows or whatever, the stake, probably better word, translated that way. But then he gets Haman's business or whatever, and then he becomes second in command. God turned, Haman's whole plot was, because of this Mordecai, this Jew, Mordecai, I'm not only going to kill him, I'm going to kill all of his family and all his whole people. But God not only didn't let that happen, but totally flipped it upside down. And Mordecai rose and came out better than ever. And Esther, for that matter. But we need to be just as dedicated to doing the right thing as Mordecai seems to have been, generally. Leaving room for God's providence, of course, but not leaving it all to God's providence, as he told her. God's workings do not cancel out mine, or maybe the other way around, whatever. Just because God might be working on something doesn't mean I get the day off, in other words.